All right. Well, welcome to the Pendulum. I'm your host, Dr. Serena Wadhwa. Thank you for being here, all of you. And today we're going to talk about um, the other part of the pendulum. So going to the other side of the pendulum of what I talked about 2 weeks ago, which was the root chakra or the brain response to stress. So I mentioned that April is Stress Awareness Month, which I'm really excited about. And hopefully, I'm going to share this one. Let me just share my PowerPoint first. All right. And April is Stress Awareness Month, which I'm really excited about. And so our next episode on April 2nd would be the very beginning of Stress Awareness Month. So if you have any particular topic that you are interested in or want to hear more about in relation to stress, I'm more than happy to accommodate that. Just send me an email or let me know, or let Pramila know, and she can forward that request to me, and I'd be happy to accommodate that as well. But today we're going to talk about the third eye chakra, which is also, known as like this kind of connection and clarity of purpose. That's kind of what it's aligned with on the spectrum with, from the brain response, or kind of more the concrete thing. And we're going to talk about symptoms, and then how do you kind of align or find some balance with this. And so going first to definitions, some of these are similar definitions to what I talked about last time. So stress, of course, is the basic definition of stress is a response to a perceived or real threat or demand. And, the body goes through this kind of adaptation to it, or it adjusts, or it accommodates any kind of perception to a demand or a threat, or it accommodates it, or it adjusts. So, recognizing that these could be internal perceptions of threat or demands, or it could be an external perception of a threat or demand. So it might be something that you're thinking about and perceiving as a threat, like a deadline for something, or traffic being threatening or demanding on you or causing pressure. Or it could be a very real threat, to your sense of safety and security, your livelihood, your life. And that also is going to be something that your body then is adjusting to or reacting to in that moment. And then the chakra is, from an Eastern perspective, it's an energy wheel or a point along the spine. There are actually 7 that we commonly refer to, but there's, I think, about 114, or possibly more. There's actually more, but there's about 114 that are above the spine. And each of the ones that are 7, these 7 that we commonly refer to, are connected to specific organs or body parts. They each also have like an associated color, an associated number. There's lots of different associations with each chakra wheel. And so think of these kind of like just wheels that are spinning of energy, and these are all aligned. And some of you have seen these, pictures of these, images and stuff like that. And this is about alignment and flow. And so whenever a chakra is blocked or is out of balance, the alignment and flow is not flowing, obviously, the way it usually does. Excuse me. And so it's being blocked, which means that there's going to be some sort of adaptation, adjustment, or accommodation made to that particular chakra. It somehow spills over. And so in this episode, we're going to talk about intuition. Whoops. Oh my goodness, I'm going forward instead of backward here, or intuition. And this is kind of like the other side of the spectrum of, when we're looking at the brain, or what the brain does. The other side is like the spirit or intuition part of who we are. And really, when I was looking up the definition of intuition, I was trying to figure out, how to explain what this is, because this is like not one of those words that is readily explainable. And so what I came up with was this kind of combination of things. And it's really just kind of this beyond um, 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 conscious reasoning, beyond reality, beyond what we normally perceive as concrete, beyond what we consider as reason, logic reason. We consider like our mind to be very rational. And so intuition and spirit tend to be beyond that. There is no rhyme or reason necessarily. We just kind of know something. And we can't really explain it. So it's not something that's necessarily explainable. And oftentimes you may have had the experience, or you may know somebody who's shared an experience where they've either had an intuitive experience happen to them, or they called it a spiritual experience where they just kind of knew, or they were moved by a spirit that told them to do something, or provided an answer or a solution or to something that they were, struggling with. And this is what we normally, not normally, but this might be considered something that we can't really comprehend in language that's what we use in our normal everyday to day experience, so to speak. And so kind of going back to broadening, what we're looking at as stress, the idea with stress is that it happens with acute stress, which is, more this flight or fight response that we have. And most of you are familiar with this, which is where you have this alarm stage, where you have this kind of instant reaction to something that happens in the moment, like you're stuck in traffic, or you don't know where your keys are, or you have a deadline that you're rushing to meet. And, the common analogy that's often given, it's kind of like if you're meeting a tiger in your path, you have this like, whoa, kind of stress response. And we don't often perceive tigers in our path these days. I mean, we perceive them. They're not real, but we perceive them. But yet the reaction that our body has is very similar to that, because the perception of that threat or that demand, or what that means to us internally, whether, how we are interpreting that, is very much the same kind of weight as, having that tiger right in front of us. And so those are the acute stressor. The acute stress response is really that kind of, off on again kind of response. It happens and then it kind of dissipates. And we have a recovery period. One of the things that we don't often talk about in when we talk about stress management or stress in general is the recovery period that happens with stress. And we all go through this to some degree, or have gone through this. I don't know how often we actually do go through it, but our bodies literally do need a recovery period when we experience stress. So if you think about it, for example, when you experience a stress response, your body goes into flight fight mode. And, your blood pressure raises, your heartbeat is faster, you feel that kind of adrenaline rush for a second, and you're looking for something, or, there's some sort of demand you're meeting, and you rush to meet that, right? You get that adrenaline surge. And then you meet it, or the threat or demand passes. You get through the traffic, or you meet, the meeting time, or you get all the tools or materials that you needed for something, a presentation or whatever it is. And so you start to relax a little bit. And so the idea, though, is that your body actually needs to restore itself to its homeostasis set point, whatever that is. Everybody's homeostasis set point is different. But if you think about like, blood pressure, I think they say that like 120/80 is like the ideal blood pressure, right? And so if you think about that as being like the homeostasis. So when people are experiencing a flight fight response, their blood pressure is going to go higher. And so in a restorative recovery period, the blood pressure actually is going back to that 120/80. The body is being allowed its time to restore back to that blood pressure. Now, most people do not get that recovery period. And that's what happens for a lot of us, is that, once we get over that kind of hump of that acute stressor or that acute stress response, we tend to experience something else, or there's this constant kind of stressor after stressor after stressor. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later or in another podcast. But the chronic stress is this kind of more insidious kind of stress that happens, or persistently wild stress that can happen, where there's this constant battle of stressors that exist for somebody. And the body goes through this kind of, like last time I talked about the polyvagal theory, and how that's one of the ways that our body accommodates and tries to reset itself in order to balance and restore its homeostasis, is by looking for ways to settle itself. And so with chronic stress, what happens is that the body doesn't get a chance to do that often enough. And some of you know the experience of when, like, you're constantly going through, you're trying to get through the day, and this happens, maybe weeks on end. And then maybe there comes a point where you're just like, you just feel like you're depleted. And then all of a sudden you get like this second wind or something. And you're just like, whoa, where did this come from? Like, I just got like this second wind and I feel great. I got all this new energy. This is your body's response to meeting your demand, to meeting this demand of like, okay, I see that, you're going to need a little oomph here, so I'm going to help you out. And so the body goes through this kind of resistance stage where it says it's going to kind of mobilize what it can to help you out. And then it's going to say, it actually, assumes to some degree that you're going to help it, and you're going to provide that restorative period where it can recover. Most people do not end up doing that. And I know this has happened for me as well, because, I've experienced this many times too before. And then what happens is that people go into the exhaustion stage, which is where their body then ends up, just kind of shutting down altogether. And some of you have experienced this as well, where maybe you get sick, or you end up sleeping, you get very fatigued, you end up feeling all these emotional, worry, panic, despair, those kinds of things. Diseases of adaptation we talked about, basically where there are diseases that are stress induced and are a result of chronic stress. For example, there is something called stress-induced hypertension, and that is a result of chronic stress that increases the blood pressure. And so that blood pressure becomes kind of like, that higher blood pressure becomes like the new norm. And so it's a higher blood pressure rate due to the stressors. And so some people have developed this as a result of stress, and then end up having to take medications or figuring out a way to change their lifestyle in order to decrease that. And so different categories that I, classify sometimes stress as being is, we all experience this kind of day-to-day stress. There are going to be these kind of normal, quote unquote, day-to-day stressors that we experience. You're kind of just living life stressors. You have these unexpected stress that occurs, these kind of things that you weren't prepared for, things that you were not expecting to happen, that, it's kind of like you get thrown a curveball, and they can be very small or they can be really big, but they do have an impact on us. And then there's these persistently wild stress, that happens. Like, it just kind of never seems to end. And it can go in waves. Like, sometimes you have what seems to be waves of very low causing stressors, and then you have these higher causing stressors. And it just feels like maybe perhaps you never get a break. And sometimes it could be like things that are considered quote unquote good stressors, like it might be like a job that you really like that might be challenging, or you're looking forward to going to, yet it's challenging. But it's coupled with, maybe other things that are not so great for you, like maybe driving in traffic or your commute or whatever that may look like. Or it might be, not having things to do because you're not sure how to spend some of your time, or things that you've recognized that you need to change, or whatever that may look like because of this new position. And then we have the insidious stress. And, insidious by definition means evil. And that's not what I'm meaning it here. But it really is meaning more of this kind of like persistent inner kind of unforeseen and unknown force that exists that is not made aware of, and it slowly over time takes over. And, negative emotions can do this to people. And people don't realize that until, maybe later, where they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how much that, caused me stress until X, Y, and Z. Or it could be anything else. So insidious is just kind of like this progressive kind of stress that occurs for people, where it slowly builds up and over time then just kind of erupts in a certain way for a person. And then it could be imploding or it could be exploding in the person. And so then we go to what, we're talking about today with the spirit intuition. And, this is the third eye, the sixth level of the chakras. And it also encompasses like people's values and their purpose. And the characteristics of this particular chakra involves, these that I'm going to talk about, but it involves the pituitary gland and the eyes and the head and the lower part of the brain. And this really involves, more about self-reflection and our intuition, which we talked about, like being beyond reason, beyond, thought, beyond knowing, beyond reality, beyond being concrete. It is about clarity, which is also about clear perception and vision. And it is about your truth. It's about knowing what that looks like. And when people have, and a lot of times when I work with people, even without from a chakra perspective, but I've noticed that, when people kind of don't, when they don't feel aligned and they don't know their purpose, or they're not in alignment with what's important to them, their values, these are some of the characteristics that tend to occur for them when they feel kind of cut off or blocked from that. And these are also characteristics when this particular chakra is blocked or is not free flowing. The wheel is not spinning the way that it's supposed to be spinning in the individual. And so there's this kind of muck that's occurring. And muck is kind of like, all those different things that are kind of distorting a person's perception from what has been clear for them. And it's kind of like muddling what's happening for them. People may feel disconnected with this. They don't feel like they're connecting with either other people. They don't feel connected to themselves. They don't feel connected either to their, surroundings, or to something larger, or to a community. They may feel lost or uncertain about things, and feeling lost in terms of, I've heard from individuals things like, I don't know what to do, or I'm not sure if this is the right thing to do, or I'm not sure if this is what I want to do. There's a lot of focus on lack, or not having enough, or not being enough. There's a lot of focus on possessions, and that could be like, in terms of what I have, like what's in my possession, or accumulating possessions. And, part of this is also about attachment, that there is this kind of sense of feeling attached. So when this wheel is spinning in balance, there is this kind of detachment, and not in the sense of not being connected, but it's a very different sense of detachment from people, places, and things. And so it's not the same kind of detachment that you experience when you're just like, don't care kind of a thing. It's not an apathy kind of feeling. And so, I was trying to figure out, like, what is a way to kind of, show more or talk more about this. And so I was looking for some quotes about what is it that other people have said about spirit or intuition. And so these were some of the things that I found about what different people have kind of said about it, that it's another way of knowing. And Gandhi had said, everyone who wills can hear the inner voice. It is within everyone. And intuition is a spiritual faculty and does not explain, but simply points the way. Intuition is the whisper of the soul. And so you can see like how there are some connections between, what this kind of elusive idea is of spirit, what we consider to be this kind of non-abstract, or this, I'm sorry, this abstract idea of spirit. We don't really know, like, it's not concrete, it's not formed, it's a formless entity, so to speak. Intuition is perception via the unconscious that brings forth ideas, images, new possibilities, and ways out of blocked situations. And this is from Jung, who's a psychologist, psychoanalyst, I believe. So these are just different perceptions, different interpretations of intuition. But it kind of gives an idea about, how intuition has been viewed, from different lenses as well. And so the other piece, coming back to different symptoms of what it would look like, what might be some things that people experience when either the chakra is blocked or when people feel disconnected. And so some physical things that are more prominent, headaches, sinus issues, eye infections, and then the more generalized, because this is a higher level of disconnection and symptoms of stress, that people may also experience that in conjunction with sleep or appetite or weight problems, difficult physical symptoms, or having difficult or different issues as well. The GI tract, the cardiovascular system. People might experience more fatigue in different ways. There might be different kinds of pain, different aches. I've also heard that when there is pain, or when people are feeling pain in certain ways that they haven't felt before, depending on what they're doing, that it might be like their intuition telling them something as well, which I thought was an interesting interpretation, one that I had not heard of before. Emotionally, people might feel disconnection or disconnected. They might feel lost, depression, agitation, restlessness, detached. And again, there might be also some irritability, anger, guilt, shame, despair, emptiness, loneliness, fear, worry. From a thought perspective, cognitively, people might have some muddled thinking. They might lack concentration, lack of focus, lack of clarity, just feeling confused. And there's that, overthinking, racing thoughts. Behaviorally, people might start things and not complete them. There might be some pacing. There might be inconsistent behaviors, and people might not realize that, they're doing things inconsistently. And that partly might relate to just not feeling connected with themselves, or, with feeling aligned with what's important to them, and what they want to do. From an existential spiritual perspective, it could also be this loss of meaning, purpose, value, sense of mission, connection, service, identity, belief, faith, those kinds of things. So kind of more, this is like pretty much what this level of disconnection is about, and when symptoms come into play. So what are some things that a person can do at this level? And so this is really about, what can you do to kind of regulate, or to balance, or to reconnect, with this, with values, with your purpose, with your truth, with just getting reconnected with things. And one of the first things, of course, is to regulate the brain. Going back to some of the basics, which we talked about a few weeks ago in the podcast, just going back to regulating the breathing, regulating the heartbeat, regulating the temperature, making sure that the body is, in this kind of homeostate space where it feels in a space of being safe, because that is going to essentially help the other levels, and allow the body and the mind and emotions and the thoughts to align itself. The next thing that a person can do is to clarify their values. And I love to do a value clarification. And I was thinking about doing that in this podcast, but then I was like, I don't know if anybody's going to actually do it. So I was like, maybe next time. I don't know. But what I usually do is I have a value clarification activity I do with people, and it usually narrows it down to their top 5 values. And so they have these 5 concepts that are very important to them, that they have, what's the word I'm looking for, that they've selected in this period of time. And so I ask questions like, what feelings come to you when you think about these values? Because that's really important. And then how do you experience these values? So for example, if a value to you is, let's say, honesty, what is the feeling that comes when you think about honesty as a value? Is it, whatever feeling that comes? It could be different for everybody, but it might be a feeling of, I don't know, of joy or of happiness. It might be feeling settled. It might be a feeling of relaxation, whatever that might look like. And how do you experience that feeling of honesty? It just feels right, or it feels like I'm speaking my truth, or it feels like it's the appropriate, that kind of a thing. Reaching out to others is another thing that people can do to help connect and balance and, find their truth. And, who are some people that you can call? Who are people that are supportive of you? And one of the important pieces with this is like-minded people. It's finding people that, may be either struggling with this, that may be feeling the same way and that you can relate with, or people that may be offering some support in terms of what helped them. They may experience the same thing and also have found their own way out of it. And maybe, finding those people and sharing your struggles can help you find something that can help you get out of it. So where do you find like-minded people? And the other thing that I usually suggest to people with this too is also looking for different kinds of support. Because, there's not going to be one type of support for a person. And so really finding different types of support can be helpful. That can be emotional support, that could be professional support, that could be intellectual support, that could be, spiritual support, anything like that can be very different. Inspiration is important too. That's another thing that can help, what arouses your emotion or arouses you to action. Who inspires you and what inspires you? So what gets you like just moving? That could be something that can help. Meditation is about listening. And so that is one thing that can also be helpful. And meditation is not just sitting with your eyes closed. By the way, it can involve very many different ways of meditating. But meditation really is about just listening and, just being open to what you hear. And it might come in the form of an image or a memory, or, you might think about somebody. And those are all, clues to something that may help you find connection or find information related to your truth, or find a way to rebalance this particular aspect. And also asking questions, just kind of being curious about, what is it that I need to do? I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's important to me. I'm kind of lost right now. I could use some answers. And then, just kind of journaling whatever comes to mind and seeing what happens. Sometimes you never know just by just kind of free flow journaling what your mind is telling you. You never know what you're going to write down. So those are just some suggestions about this. And then I'm going to just leave you with, you've got to find the force inside you. That is from Joseph Campbell, who's well known for his myths. And I just love that about him. But he wrote a lot about that and has done a lot of documentaries on that. So I don't know if anybody has any comments or questions in the minute or two that we have left, but I will leave it open for a moment. I'll share some of my resources here. Anybody have any comments or questions?
I just want to say I never realized the third eye was connected to self-reflection.
Oh, okay.
So, but it makes sense. Do I see myself?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I
Yeah.
took some snapshots of your info. I thought it was pretty helpful. I have a person in mind that I thought this would be really helpful for.
Wonderful. Great. All right. Anyone else have any comments that they would like to share? All right. Well, if you have any particular topics of interest that you want to hear for Stress Awareness Month in April, one of my favorite months, please feel free to reach out to me and I will be more than happy to provide whatever information I can. So thank you for being here with me tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank
Serena.
you.
All
Thanks,
right. Have a
Lena.
good night.
Bye.
Thank you everyone for watching. Those of you, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.